have a candidate here who has made his views clear. It's nationalism. It's a strong border controls. It's competing nationally. The counter paradigm, the establishment paradigm, is one of globalization, of open borders, but she's not defending that. And so I think whatever happens in the elections, it hasn't been a contest between two different paradigms. It's been a contest between one paradigm that's very strong, that's defending itself, and a candidate who isn't willing to defend her program. There were some laws that changed, that Obama changed towards the end of his time in office, that did allow for U.S. government propaganda in the United States. It also, he famously, his head of the Department of Homeland Security, changed election infrastructure to include cognitive infrastructure, meaning the so-called mis or disinformation, the disfavored views.
Yeah.
So you see that, and in fact, it happens after Trump is elected. So to what extent and to what share of Democrats really care about winning elections, and what part of them just want to moralize and feel superior to others?
My guest on this week's program is Michael Shellenberger. Michael is a professor, author, and journalist who is recognized as a fierce defender of free speech against governments, social media companies, and NGOs who use censorship to shut down opinions and facts that they consider threatening to the status quo. Like most of the guests on this program, Michael has shown tremendous courage. The courage to leave the Democratic Party when it became evident that their brand of progressivism was ruining American cities, and the courage to speak up against powerful interest groups who were censoring opinions they disagreed with. Michael, welcome to my program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. We had dinner last night, and it's irresistible. The only thing that we're talking about, we're in Miami, the only thing we're talking about at the moment is the American election, because it's so consequential, not just for America, but for the rest of the world. What is your gut feeling?
I have the same gut feeling as Nate Silver, which is it looks to me like Trump will win. That's all vibes. The polling, of course, is even, and there's so much we don't know about turnout in particular. We were all, people were surprised in 2016, but that's the way it feels it's been trending. There's a way in which, for me, one of the biggest surprises is that Kamala Harris, that it is so close. She has been such a poor candidate, I think objectively, setting aside what you view of her policies. She had an excellent debate against Trump. I thought she performed extremely well, so well that I thought if she had maintained that capacity to really be sharp in that way, that she could have won. But she did a series of media interviews afterwards where she wasn't able to answer basic questions. She didn't seem prepared. And it's one thing to say, well, you're not necessarily prepared for media, but this is a person that needs to be negotiating with Vladimir Putin and President Xi and major leaders. And so for me, I think it felt like we were seeing a person that was becoming increasingly fragile over the course of the campaign, not increasingly strong. Contrast that to Donald Trump with Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
He just looked solid for 3 hours sitting there. He doesn't come across as somebody who's almost 80 years old. So yeah, it feels to me like Trump will win, but we're in a moment of extreme chaos.
It is a moment of extreme chaos. And what I want to gauge is it when you listen to analysts talk about Kamala Harris and why she is so frustratingly vague. You hear some people saying, well, it's she's unprepared, she's lazy, and it's all of these personal attacks on her. But is that what's going on? Sometimes I think she can only be vague because she doesn't disagree with the policies of the last 4 years. She doesn't disagree with the constraints on the First Amendment. She doesn't disagree with the Middle East politics where Israel is kneecapped. She doesn't disagree with, there are things that she flip-flopped on, first saying no fracking when she was vice president, and now saying she'll go on for fracking. But she can't flip-flop on everything. So she's then left with
nothing.
with nothing to say. And,
Yeah.
and that explains Donald Trump's confidence, because he knows what he wants policy-wise.
Yep.
And you can disagree with what he says or you can agree with it, but it's very clear. And in her case, like, what do you think she wants?
Yeah, I think it's a really great point in that you have a candidate here who has made his views clear. It's nationalism. It's a strong border controls. It's competing nationally. The counter paradigm, the establishment paradigm, is one of globalization, of open borders, but she's not defending that. And so I think whatever happens in the elections, it hasn't been a contest between two different paradigms. It's been a contest between one paradigm that's very strong, that's defending itself, and a candidate who isn't willing to defend her program, which everybody knows what the program is. In fact, in some ways, I think she didn't do it. She should have done more to distance herself from Biden. Of course, they were trapped because she was in the administration. But I mean, in many ways, Democrats they achieved everything they wanted. You know, Barack Obama got the health care that Democrats had advocated for. Biden-Harris did a big climate spending bill. They've, they had a huge stimulus, second stimulus after COVID, and they had open borders. We're letting huge numbers of migrants. The fact that she's not defending it, I think, speaks volumes to the unpopularity of that agenda and the declining credibility of it. And so you end up with a candidate in Kamala Harris. She wasn't even getting more than 1% of the vote when she ran for president in 2019. She had to drop out of the race. She then in 2020 and then in 2024 had a PR operation by her friends to basically demand that she be the vice presidential candidate, and that there not be an open primary, and that she just be anointed presidential candidate on the basis of race and sex. And Americans, at bottom, we're very sympathetic to historical, victims of oppression.
Yeah.
But we want racial equality. We want gender equality. And so you get someone who has her whole career played the race and sex card to get where she is. I think she ran out of rope. And I think that's where we're at, is that she's somebody that doesn't have the legitimacy that somebody would need to lead this country.
I look at her, and I've been looking at her over some time now, and I conclude she is a DEI hire. She is the world's most famous, most prominent DEI hire, and she can't deliver on the things that they wanted her to deliver. And even when they write the notes for her, I mean, she has a hard time navigating. She's not a political talent, all the rest of it. But I think it also is an incredibly difficult agenda to defend. That is, to begin with, why they need, machinations like DEI. The way to push forward their agenda is through guidelines and directives administratively within organizations. And it's not through getting a majority of votes in the ballot box. And I think let's talk about the issues themselves. Do you trust Donald Trump with the First Amendment?
That's a very important question. So I'm a journalist, and sometimes I've been an activist in the past. I ran for governor. But as a journalist, I decided not to vote for a presidential candidate. I have an old-fashioned view of journalists. They should not take a position on presidential races if they're covering them heavily. If the choice is between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on the First Amendment, there's no question who's better. It's going to be Donald Trump. That's, Kamala Harris said in 2019 that Donald Trump should be deplatformed. That Twitter should censor him. That was before Twitter decided to deplatform him. She's
still saying he should be deplatformed by calling him a Nazi and a fascist. Because that is, why would you want a Nazi and a fascist to have a platform? So
that's right.
There's still, so in terms of his record, because he's going to be a dictator on day one. He is going to do all sorts of horrible things to the press. Do you trust him with the freedom of the press?
Well, I mean, the honest answer is I don't trust anybody with it.
Yeah.
That's why I think there's, the First Amendment is only as good as the paper it's written on. And the founders of this country knew that we needed a culture that really supported freedom of expression and free speech, that it has to be rooted in the culture. And that's why so much of our work, it's both exposing the censorship industrial complex, but it's also explaining why free speech is so important. It's reminding people of its importance. It's one thing to say it's good and that we have a moral right to it, but you have to explain to people it's actually better to let people express their prejudices and hatreds so that you can argue back against them, so that it's better for people to spread misinformation, let them do that so that you can correct them. And the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that it's better to let lies flow unimpeded so that you can have those corrections. But I do think that, I think that people detect some authoritarian tendencies in Donald Trump. He said I'd be a dictator on day one. I think it was an unfortunate choice of words. He said other things that I don't care for around poisoning the blood of the American people. That's not the language I care for. But I do think that he's now in a position, having been deplatformed, he now has the support of Bobby Kennedy, who's been more censored than any other political candidate in recent memory. Mm-hmm. And I think he's publicly committed to it. So for me, that'll make it much harder for him to waver on this essential question.
Well, I've been a politician myself, and I've been watching politics for a long time, and I came to the conclusion, don't look at personalities. I mean, initially that's important. They're just a front for a certain policy agenda for a party. Yeah. But he and his party do have a record, and Harris and her party do have a record. Yep. So the first 2 years between 2016 and 2018, it would have been like 2022. So when he got in, he won in 2016, but his term started in 2017. And then we had the midterm elections. So during those first 2 years, they had the presidency and they had the Senate and they had the House. And if they wanted to get rid of journalism and if they wanted to be dictators, they could have been all of those things. And he was the most criticized president in my lifetime. I know that George Bush was almost hounded out of office by the media with all of their criticisms, but he was called everything under the sun. His presidency was delegitimized. They had all of these special counsels, impeachments, considering very loudly whether the 25th Amendment could or would not be applied. He didn't go. He had all the levels of office. He didn't go after any of those people. On the other hand, Biden and Harris were in office. They also have a record. And they did have an elaborate machine to end free speech. Or to limit it and to constrain it. And there's no one who knows this more than you do. So comparing those two records, first, can you describe, because most people find it very difficult to understand, what exactly is it that the Biden-Harris administration did to constrain the First Amendment? Go on.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of it is there's sort of two things going on. There's the Trump administration and the Biden administration. You have to compare them. Mm-hmm. But beneath that, there is sounds conspiratorial, but there is a secret government. It's sometimes called the deep state. So the most significant...
It's the civil servants.
The civil servants. And the deep state refers to Department of Homeland Security, FBI, CIA. Yeah. And in December of 2019, FBI was given Hunter Biden's laptop by the computer repair store owner. FBI, we now know, actually just today it came out that the thing we had suspected but could not prove, we now have proof that FBI had verified that this was authentically Hunter Biden's laptop. And it showed a vast influence peddling scheme whereby the Biden family would be enriched with payments going to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's brother in exchange for policy actions, administrative actions by Vice President Biden at the time and President Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. The FBI then was monitoring Rudy Giuliani, who had then a copy of the laptop. They know that he went to the New York Post.
Is that legal to monitor Americans?
At the time, the question is whether or not they were justified in getting the warrant to monitor him. Mm-hmm. The idea was that he was under foreign influence at the time. Yeah. So they were monitoring him. But the important thing is that we knew that he was being monitored. Yeah. And then we see two things happen. The FBI directly tells Facebook that a Russian disinformation campaign relating to Hunter Biden is coming. And then Aspen Institute, which is a U.S. government think tank, orchestrates what is effectively called a pre-bunking, where they were basically brainwashing journalists to be expecting a Russian disinformation campaign relating to Hunter Biden's laptop. Yeah. That's illegal, high crimes by deep state organizations to influence the 2020 elections and convince people that the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't what it appeared to be.
So that is one clear example of what the Biden-Harris administration did. Another clear example that is frequently cited by those who follow politics is the COVID measures. When Trump was president, he empowered the states and said, you deal with as much as was necessary. Biden and Harris centralized that, and they had all of these mandates. And people who resisted, it's not so much you can mandate things, and then there are citizens who say, fine, I'll go I'm vaccinated. I'm not an anti-vaccine person. But looking at the people who were asking questions about vaccinations and all sorts of other constraints, they were demonized. The law went after them. Their bank accounts were frozen. I mean, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's an incredible, I think even the word censorship doesn't capture how elaborate this machinery was. Both the character assassinations against, world-class epidemiologists like Jay Bhattacharya at Stanford, or Martin Kulldorff at Harvard, or Sunetra Gupta at Cambridge, who had written the Great Barrington Declaration, which called for focused protection of the vulnerable, but allowing society to return as normal, certainly no school lockdowns. We then saw the most significant censorship industrial complex effort is organized by the Department of Homeland Security, in particular using something called the Stanford Internet Observatory, which was a think tank at Stanford. In 2020, it did it was called the Election Integrity Project, to basically flag the so-called misinformation that was on Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms to those platforms and ask the platforms to take it down. Then in 2021, they did the Virality Project, which is the same thing, but as it relates to COVID. These are deep state initiatives. One of them occurred under Trump, one of them occurred under Biden. The one that occurred under Trump, I'm confident that the Trump administration did not approve it. It was something that was going on separately. But in both cases, these were mass censorship efforts, censoring ordinary individuals. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, came out and he said two things, actually. He said, first of all, the FBI had told me that the Hunter Biden laptop or that the Hunter Biden information would be Russian disinformation. And then second, that the White House urged us to censor information about the origins of COVID. So it was the origins of COVID that they wanted to censor and did censor. And then it was also true stories, that's their language, of vaccine side effects. So COVID supercharged a censorship industrial complex that was already brewing. That was a counter-populist censorship effort. It wasn't politically neutral, as they claim. It was just about fighting misinformation. It was all directed at populists, mostly right-wing populists, because that's where the right is, but an occasion left-wing populists. So it's a deep state counter-populist effort to censor disfavored views, and then also to support propaganda. So I think it's important to think of it holistically, that on the one hand, they're seeking to repress views that they don't believe in, and on the other hand, they're using the news media, willing participants, to spread the official state propaganda about COVID.
Yeah, I know, that is my takeaway. The Biden-Harris administration was much more repressive than the Trump administration. And this takes me to the way the justice system is used against Trump himself. The 34 counts that all of them stick, that sort of thing. And again, when he had the presidency and both houses of Congress, he didn't go after his opponents. So during his campaign in 2016, there was all the shouting of, drain the swamp and lock her up. But he didn't do any of those things. So this is, I think, part of what makes Trump, if you take him literally, you'll drive yourself crazy. You'll develop Trump derangement syndrome. It will go really far. But if you say, I'm just going to judge his actions, not his words, I can say he is on the record, having been president all this time, of not using, or did he use the awesome powers of the state to go after his opponents? Because there is a record on the other side of doing the exact.
Absolutely. I mean, one important example is that he never violated a Supreme Court order. That's our highest court. You must obey that. Joe Biden, on the other hand, after the Supreme Court ruled that he could not forgive student loans, they went and found another way to do that. In terms of journalists, there was no comparison in terms of who was more repressive. In fact, Barack Obama was much more aggressive in going after, leaks and whistleblowers and journalists, and weaponizing the IRS, weaponizing government agencies. So I don't think there's any question that Democrats have overwhelmingly been the party that has weaponized government in comparison to Republicans. It's not to say that Republicans have never done it, but there's just really no comparison. The lawfare you're describing, this effort to incarcerate Trump, prosecute Trump, prevent him from running for office.
Bankrupt him.
What's that?
And bankrupt him.
And bankrupt
demonized him. Yeah.
Only by fact of his company going public would he have the resources to even pay to prevent the, basically being incarcerated or being bankrupted. That's new. I mean, in the American history, that's a very new phenomenon where you would be using what they call lawfare. That's something that had been used in other countries, including ones that U.S. had, intelligence operations operating against. But basically, and that's what you see a lot of the tactics and techniques that have been used by the CIA in, say, the Arab Spring or in the color revolutions of Eastern Europe come back to the United States.
So it used to be illegal to use those tactics on U.S. soil. What happened? What changed that? I mean, did the law change?
There were some laws that changed, that Obama changed towards the end of his time in office, that did allow for U.S. government propaganda in the United States. It also, he famously, his head of the Department of Homeland Security, changed election infrastructure to include cognitive infrastructure, meaning the so-called mis or disinformation, the disfavored views.
Yeah.
So you see that, and in fact, it happens after Trump is elected. So they clearly are planning a counter-populism as soon as they see Trump get elected. And it's, that is the moment. And it's, we always try to figure out, to what extent was it really about Russia? The people that I've interviewed, our sources say that really originates as a political strategy by the Hillary Clinton campaign to undermine Trump's legitimacy as a nationalist and populist. Because if you want to undermine the claim of a nationalist, is that they're loyal to the country that they're in, and they're actually loyal to all citizens, regardless of their race or religion. So naturally, if you want to attack the strengths of a nationalist populist, you attack them as racist, meaning not committed to the country, but rather committed to a race, and also not committed to the country and under the influence of Russia in particular. So at one point I wondered
which
if
in America is hard, because
Yes.
America is an idea, and it's his constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it's not built on an ethnicity. It's not homogenous at all.
Right.
You could attack Germany for being racist, but you can't attack American nationalism for being racist.
That's
and
right.
so that is, I think, why then they concentrate on attacking his person.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see, and there's a very famous graph that was done by an analysis of media coverage, and when it starts to mention, when the words racist or white supremacist, when those words start getting used, it's really out of Black Lives Matter in 2013.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any evidence that was orchestrated or inorganic coming from the top, but you do see on these graphs, it's a sharp increase from 2013 on up. One of the ways that for effective propaganda, must tap into shared national values. We have a very strong commitment in the United States to civil rights. We were all raised on that. That's one of our we look back on that with great nostalgia. So to attack Trump on the basis of race was a really effective strategy. But again, it was race and then also this foreign influence that was their focus.
That was their focus, yeah. So that is repression. That is the use and abuse, in my view, of the tools of states and institutions of states to go after your opponents and relentlessly and openly do so.
Yes.
And they could do it because I think what happens on the left side of the aisle is that they can come to think of their causes as being righteous causes, and then do it with this religious zeal. They know it's wrong. They know it's wrong to do it. But it's Trump. You demonize him. You create this caricature of an impending Hitler.
That's right.
And then that gives you moral permission to abuse the system.
Yeah, and we see this. The one thing we haven't mentioned yet is that even the CIA got involved with this. So the final coup de grace on the Hunter Biden laptop was you had 51 former CIA directors and other people in the intelligence community do an open letter claiming that there was hallmarks of Russian information operation. That letter was approved by the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, within a few hours, thereby implicating her in the disinformation effort.
Yeah.
So what you see are these characters, because traditionally you have these tactics, these very aggressive tactics of demonization, of censorship, of propaganda we associated with the radical left. You'd also sort of see it in CIA operations abroad. You see those things coming together, and that they're actually embraced by mainstream Democrats, establishment liberals. It's sometimes we always are asking how much of this is coming from the top. Is it inorganic? How much of it's coming from the grassroots? When you see, you can't think of a time, or at least we don't know. Don't have all the JFK records, but this direct interference by the FBI and the CIA in elections.
On our side.
That's completely unprecedented.
They cite McCarthyism, the McCarthy era. I think, there is what I find very attractive and reassuring about the American system is the inbuilt checks and balances.
Yep.
And if you want as a citizen, you have an election, you have the outcome of an election, and then you accept the outcome of the election, let them govern, and then trust the system of checks and balances, which I think Ben Shapiro calls it a colander. It's bound to catch everything when you shook it, if it is properly applied.
Right.
It was massively applied to Donald Trump. And I think if he wins again, it's going to be applied to him. And I find that very reassuring. Why is it not applied, or why was it not applied during the Biden-Harris administration? And actually, even during the Obama administration.
Right. Yeah, I go back to this. So, it's interesting because, of course, I've never believed more in these checks and balances and the First Amendment than I have in the last few years as we've uncovered the censorship industrial complex. At the same time, it is rooted in the culture. And so the fact that, you've seen the United States since World War II attempt to impose this balance of powers in other countries and not having it stick. And most dramatically, we've seen it in Brazil, where we see the judiciary, but in other countries, the executive branch. Because the culture's not there. They're more, in many cultures around the world, it's more of a, hey, my tribe or my party or my people are in power, so we get all the spoils, and it's just victor takes all.
Yeah.
That sort of, so this, the Great Awakening, as we call it, with Black Lives Matter from 2013 on. Yeah. Then I think that religious zeal, that evangelical zeal, that fervency, it affects it, and infects, many people in power, including heads of intelligence agencies. Yeah. It's an extraordinary moment. Normally, there's a former CIA analyst named Martin Gurry who describes how traditionally, CIA directors when they retire, FBI directors when they retire, they lead boring lives. Yeah. They say boring things. They're scrupulously nonpartisan. That radically changed after 2016. You see, current and former CIA, FBI directors saying outlandish, outrageous things about Trump. Yeah. He was genuinely triggering among establishment figures. And I think there was a calculation made at the same time that Trump was a genuine threat to the global economic and security order that's existed since World War II. Yeah. To what extent did they really believe it? And they were really just partisans? To what extent was it an objective analysis? Trump made NATO pay more.
I think that was good.
And that was good. He renegotiated NAFTA. I think most people agree that was good. Biden kept many of the tariffs. Yeah. So I think that the alarmism was not merited by what happened in the facts, but I do think that was what was animating these deep state actors to fundamentally break the law and interfere in the elections.
I want to correct my question and say, when I was saying why were the Biden-Harris administrations and Obama administrations not subjected to the same level of checks and balances, I was talking about the media, because I know that Republicans in the opposition were actually, and the Supreme Courts, so those were functioning to the extent, I think, to the best of their ability. Yes. On the media side, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to break with them and come out. You were on the left. I also started out on the left. And there's this shift where I think we've both experienced, the left just keeps going farther left. There was that sick man, I think.
Colin Wright made. Yeah.
Yeah, and Elon made it very famous. It, yes. Yeah. It takes tremendous amount of courage to come out of that. They can ruin you. You did it. What does it, and it's also inspirational because people look at you now and see, and they look at Matt Taibbi, they look at Barry Wise, they look at Winston Marshall, they look at a lot of people and say, hey, he's done it. I can do it too. What does it take? And what is
it's an exceedingly painful process. I mean, I lost most of my friends. I lost a lot of my donors. It's not intuitive in your mid 40s or late 40s to give up your career and community and friends, without a safety net. If you don't come from, I don't come from money. I had nothing to go on. It was actually a period where I came back to my faith. I know that you have as well. Yeah. And because when you strip it all away, you certainly, I had my wife and my kids were supportive, but for me, there was so much else that I had lost that I really found myself turning to a faith and believing, because if you're going to affirm truth over livelihood and community, that truth is really a spiritual commitment at that point.
Absolutely.
I will say I don't recommend it, in the sense that if you can avoid having that, I'm still not really over it all. I think we're all still processing it, because the experience, particularly with the friends, the donors are more fickle in general, but with friends, it's hard because it's just a real loss of innocence, because you felt that you had friends that were your friends separate from politics. And when you realize that in fact it was contingent on politics, it's very painful, and it's really impossible not to take it personally. I look back now and I go, I wish I hadn't taken it so personally. That it wasn't about, it was about something else. It's about people that are treating their politics as a religion. But it is painful. Now, I will say though that all the people you just mentioned would all agree that we're better off now. We love where we're at. I mean, last night we were together, and I was just enjoying my friends, my new friends, Winston, Melissa, Ethan Strauss, these people that are just these new friends.
All the heretics.
And we also have this common experience. So it's a very beautiful thing to come out the other side and find, people that have been through something very similar to you. Because it's one thing to make friends when, you haven't had that adversity, but when you go through a common experience, it's so many things. People will say things like, "Oh yeah, that happened to me too." It's nice to be on the other side of it. It's hard to do, and I think it's a particular issue with the left, where I just think people on the right are more likely to be religious. They have their religion. They care about politics passionately, and I'm not saying none of them break off friendships over it, but it does seem to be peculiar to the left, where you suddenly discover that somehow our friendship depended on who I supported as president, or the kind of, or whether I mean, for me, it was just going on Fox was just considered outrageous. It was, I have very family members that say awful things about it, and for me, it was like, well, it's not like MSNBC or CNN are inviting me on to sell my book. I mean, I make my living selling books. How do you not go on Fox? But then even the idea that if you go on Fox, that somehow you agree with everything on Fox, it's just absurd. But that's a religious thing. It's like if you decide to go from one church to the other, there's some expectation that you agree with the teachings of that church.
I came to this country in 2006, and I started in Washington, D.C. with the American Enterprise Institute, and I was getting all these warnings from my liberal friends that, these people are real monsters. They want to throw black people back into chains, and things like that were said. And I would mingle with conservatives in this country, and I would mingle with liberals. And I can report after so many years that it's just so much easier to let your guard down with conservatives. They really don't care what you believe. I was an atheist. I was denouncing and condemning and making fun of Christianity with my Christian friends. They didn't give a hoot. And when I'm around my liberal friends in California and in other places, everybody is literally walking on eggshells. They're too terrified of telling each other where they stand on any given policy. And you see people whispering. And I keep thinking, hey, we're in America. This is a free country. Why are you whispering? And they're whispering because they're terrified of losing friends, of losing their jobs, of not getting a promotion, of some kind of social consequence, which for them is really almost like you hear people thinking about suicide. I'm not kidding, for fear of losing their friends, because they lean towards, and I'm talking about topics like transgender. So you're a parent and you're struggling with your child coming out with gender dysphoria. You don't believe it. And you can't share that with your family. You can't share that amongst your friends, what you really think.
Right.
Because you're worried, there's, first of all the issues you're having with your child, and then there's your environment. I thought, that is a sick environment to live in. I don't want to live in that. I don't want to be a part of that. I've never let go of a friend because of what they think and what they believe in. And if they want to let go of me, that wasn't a true friend to begin with.
Yes, I mean it's totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Totalitarianism is psychopathological. It's not just political. I mean, there's a lot of definitions of totalitarianism and a lot of different characteristics. One of them is that the politics it becomes everything has to become political.
Yeah.
So we see this in the Great Awakening.
Yeah.
You can't write about a foreign culture if you're not of that culture. If you're an actor, you can't. If you're not the same race, sex, class, whatever of that actor, you can't portray that actor.
Yeah.
Which is meaning that you're not acting. You're supposed to be doing something else. It's the crowding out. The other characteristic of totalitarianism that scholars have noted is the hunting for heretics and apostates.
Yeah.
And it's this. There's never enough. You always it's like a real desire, and that's the kind of the witch hunts and the moral panics. And yeah, I mean, what's disturbing? There's on the one hand, it's better if someone's like, "Hey, I'm just too scared to speak out." I saw people. These are highly educated PhDs, professors, including at very good universities, tell me in 2020 that really we had, that we just really haven't talked enough about race and racism in the United States. And I was just like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's
all we talk about.
Yeah. I mean, you and I are about the same age. You grew up in the 70s and 80s in the United States. It's just, and it's a beautiful story. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is like the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, these are gods. This is all, it's the main thing that we're taught. So then you have people say, oh, we haven't talked about it enough. It's like being told in, the Soviet Union or a communist country that we haven't talked enough about Marx and Lenin.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's the official state ideology at this point.
Yeah.
And so that was the most disturbing part of it. And of course, those are often the same people that are breaking off the friendships or condemning you because they're so, and in some ways they're full of fear too. But what was even more frightening is the way you see otherwise brilliant people saying things that are just simply not true, and that were clearly a result of that moral panic.
And that, what you described for me, is what I would say. It is basically relinquishing your critical faculties. You don't think critically anymore about things that matter,
right?
Like elections and policies and so on. You just blindly follow your tribe. And I don't know, I just love to be an optimist. But I am optimistic about a couple of things. One is this totalitarian propaganda model is being challenged by Americans who think it doesn't serve them. I saw it initially on the fights around transgenderism, opening girls and women's sports for men, opening women's prisons for men, and then the consequences that are dire of women being raped and killed, women's shelters, all of this. And I just saw more and more people thinking, I'm going to break away from a cult, propaganda cult, whatever it is. So I find that promising. And then more and more, which I think is consequential, is the elite going to break away from this? Because in the beginning, when all this was occurring, I was thinking, people with a lot of money, surely they don't care. They can simply say, I don't agree with this. And then later on, I found out, well, they do. These CEOs, they could lose their positions. They could be accused of, the whole Me Too thing. So actually, if you belong to the highest income categories, you have more to lose than us, ordinary people. But that there is a breakthrough there. Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, maybe even Jeff Bezos yesterday, or the day before yesterday, just now. it's people are breaking away from it, and I find that very promising.
That's right.
Yeah. Am I too optimistic?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that it's definitely accelerating, right? So, I mean, you see, if you kind of start from Barry Weiss leaving the New York Times.
Amazing woman, by the way. I love her.
Yeah. And that opens up, an opportunity. And then part of what you realize when you start covering this is just how many people had their lives destroyed, their careers, their friendships, their families.
Yeah.
And so that was already 4 years ago, but yeah, you see it accelerating. I mean, you just gave, Jeff Bezos in 2020 made a big show of his support for Black Lives Matter, and Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter at the time, huge show of support for Black Lives Matter. Now you get Jeff Bezos in the Washington Post yesterday defending his decision not to make a presidential endorsement at his newspaper, the Washington Post.
He said, even more than that, he said, the media is biased, and when it comes to the perception of the media, it's now below Congress.
That's right. 31% of Americans trust the news media.
Yeah.
And, and it's affected the readership. I mean, Vice was a very promising and very good investigative journalism company, and it went woke.
And it went broke.
And so when I feel optimistic, it's that it feels like the dam is collapsing, and that the more people, it sort of accumulates. The more people come out, the safer it is for other people to come out. And look, I'm as guilty of it as other people. I mean, I certainly suffered the consequences, particularly on the environment and on crime, which also had to do with race, at least obliquely. But on the gender issue, I mean, I watched Abigail Shrier on Joe Rogan in 2020, and I would call her and we'd talk, and I read her book twice, and part of me just couldn't believe how awful it was and what was really happening. I think there was a moment there where she was a little bit like, come on, dude, like, you've got a platform, you're an important person to write about this, time to step up and find your courage. And we finally did, and we started publishing some pieces in 2023, and then somebody leaked us the internal files of the main, gender medical mistreatment organization, which we published earlier this year. But it's not, it's never intuitive to do things that are going to get you attacked. But for the gender one, it's like that was for me like the last. That was kind of the last thing to fall, and it was like I have to speak out about it. It's a moral issue. Now it's one of the things I care the most about.
It is harming children. I can't get over the mutilation, the disfiguring of the children, and it's done by adults. And then they use this flowery, positive language of gender affirming. If you're affirming, why are you taking off healthy body parts? And I'm going to vote for Trump because of that issue, among others. For me, it's a First Amendment, and it's the issue of, I cannot understand why the Biden-Harris administration are doubling down on that, but they are, and that's because they're ideological, and it's just horrific. It's too horrific to countenance. I
mean, you have like each one of those issues. I mean, I would say the big three are, for me, First Amendment, gender mistreatment,
immigration,
and then open borders.
I
mean, each one of them is enough to get a government out of power. They're just such a it's just such a violation of human rights. And I mean, there are violations of the values that the Democrats claim to hold. So you're no longer, this is not a partisan thing anymore. It's like, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, the Democrats were in favor of free speech. They were anti-war, and they were in defense of gay kids and gay people. Well, the victims in many cases of gender disorder are often gay kids, kids with anxiety, kids on the autism spectrum. They're the most vulnerable children. The WPATH files, that was the gender files, the internal files that were leaked to us. They showed that people with mental illness, with schizophrenia, people that were homeless, they were worried about conducting genital operations on a schizophrenic person because it was homeless, because they were worried they would not be able to consent and to do the things, without getting into the details, to do the things to manage the surgery after it occurred while being schizophrenic and living on the streets. The fact that was even being contemplated is so shocking. And I've done my book San Francisco did a history of the mistreatment of the mentally ill, and for centuries we've said, oh, never again, and we won't give lobotomies anymore. We're not going to stab ice picks through the eyes of people and scramble the brains. But here we are doing really barbaric surgeries, blocking puberty of children before they could possibly consent, sterilizing them. It's still so shocking. It's still hard to believe that it's happening.
Yeah. It's also, I think that this is all the whole far left agenda. They've driven out the moderates out of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is an institution that's captured and subverted and I think made a lot of people politically homeless.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that I find fascinating is the use of language and then this projection of saying, the other side, they're the ones who are the dictator. They're the ones who are lying. On all of these issues, the border, transgender, all of the issues we've just touched on, it's the Democratic Party officials who have openly and consistently lied about it. And then the left-wing media, I don't want to call them media, it's just propaganda organs, that consistently lie about them. And it's a lie to say that it's gender affirming when you're cutting off healthy body parts. That kind of thing, that becomes intolerable. And it's become, fortunately, intolerable fast on the economic level for blue-collar workers. I think in 2016, they were the first ones to desert the Democratic Party. And then along came, in this cycle, it's men, it's the tech community. It is, they're going to be left with no constituency. And even, let's say, on foreign policy, it was astonishing to see Arab Muslims now saying that they're going to vote for Trump. I think it's because they just don't believe it. They've become the party that accuses others of lying, but they've become the party of liars. Absolutely. Because on that issue, on the Hamas, whether you're either pro-Hamas or you're pro-Israel, I don't think it's pro-Palestinian to keep, sacrificing Palestinian children and Palestinian citizens, sacrifice them to this cycle of wars because of an ideology. So it really is Hamas. On this even, just as clear-cut as can be, the Biden-Harris administration and Harris as a presidential candidate cannot just come out and say, I'm against this. I'm going to empower Israel to do what they need to do.
Right. Well, it's there's so much you said in that worth unpacking. I think the first start with the working class that clearly, and it's a big danger for Democrats because 2/3 of Americans are not college educated, only 1/3 are college educated. So if Democrats are going to be the party of the college educated and Republicans of the non-college educated, the Republicans are going to have a lasting majority. So that's a real threat to the Democrats. The other thing I was going to say is that, black voters favored Biden by 90%.
Not anymore.
Well, not anymore. And look how vulnerable that is, because it's very hard to go from 90% to 95%, but it's very easy to go from 90% to 85%. So the Democratic coalition now looks a lot more vulnerable now than it did before. So it's young men, it's black men, and it's Latino men that are increasingly defecting to Republicans and to Trump. The first big lie on migration, of course, and it was in the New York Times all the time, it was amazing to read, is that bringing in all of these low-skill, poor and working class immigrants would have no impact whatsoever on the salaries of working people. It violates the fundamental laws of supply and demand. You go and increase the supply of low-wage workers, you're going to depress wages, you're going to depress the price of that labor. So that was the first thing. They gaslit the working class into saying that all this mass migration wouldn't affect them. They, God bless class interest. God bless the fact that people actually do defend their class interest, and the class interest of working class people is to reduce the supply, and increase their wages. So that was the first one. But you my colleague Alex Gutentag, who's now my co-author, she describes the increasing, like the left went from demonizing, Trump supporters, but then it was going after the entire working class, and then it was all white people, and then it becomes men.
Yeah.
And this latest thing where the Obamas are getting up there saying that men who don't want to vote for Kamala Harris, and Barack Obama said black men who don't want to vote for Kamala Harris are sexist.
Yeah, right.
This is completely alienating to people to suggest. I mean, maybe people have a reason to not like Kamala Harris. It has nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman.
Yeah.
So you see, this is the thing that gives me hope, is the fact that nihilism, which is driving the Democrats' agenda and the wokeism, is so destructive that it turns on itself and becomes self-destructive.
And it is self-destructive because policies have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
If you open borders and people flood in, neighborhoods change, and people who might have voted for you because of identity politics when times were good
Right.
are now being affected, not only in their pocketbook, but the streets are not safe.
Yes.
Women are being assaulted and raped. I still don't understand why a majority of women want to vote for, an administration that opened the borders the way they did. I wrote a whole book about it, what's happening in Europe when men
Mm-hmm.
come from societies that don't respect women. And they come to societies where they haven't been taught, they're not being actively assimilated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly unsafe today because of immigration for women in France, in Germany, in Britain. And I watched this whole let's open the borders thing, and it was, this is going to hurt women, this is going to hurt children, this is going to hurt the poor. Learn from the mistakes of Europe. Don't repeat them.
That's right.
And here we are,
Yeah.
repeating them also. I do not get the Obamas. I think they're still insistent on the propaganda and on identity politics.
Yes. Well, it's amazing how we always say they're out of touch, but
Yeah.
you would also kind of go, look, they look at the polling, they look at the focus groups, they do have some interactions with ordinary people, but absolutely out of touch with some basic aspects of psychology,
Yeah.
don't, demonize, don't assume why people want to vote against Kamala Harris. I had another thought as you were talking, which was that there's the part of the reason we know that this wokeism and the radical left is a religion is that they'll take something that they think is they'll take a policy and turn it into a moral position. So,
Yeah.
for example, the open borders, bringing a lot of immigrants, they've made that basically a sacred principle that they're going to bring in all these poor people who are, of course, in bad situations, often oppressed. They're many of them are victims. They're seeking asylum. And then when you try to raise the second order consequences, the unintended side effects, the fact that these are people that, often don't share American values around the equality of women or around corruption or, manipulating the system. We were on Skid Row, which is this
Or just
famous,
not being productive.
or not being productive. The
Yeah.
work ethic that is so part of the Western tradition. I mean, it took a long time to develop these values of delayed gratification, of the work ethic, of community responsibility, of universal citizenship for everybody in your country rather than just your own people or your own tribe. Those took a long time to develop.
Yeah.
And you suddenly bring in a huge group of people that don't share those values, there's going to be consequences to that. But Democrats didn't want to hear it. In fact, any conversation about it was considered immoral. And that's how you know it's a religion.
Well, because I think it's also something you said earlier, where you say the people now voting for the Democratic Party are people who can cocoon themselves from these consequences.
Right.
They're college educated, they're wealthy, they live in very expensive neighborhoods. When the governor of Florida sent the immigrants to the sanctuary city of Martha's Vineyard, it took them, 48 hours to kick them out?
Of course.
And so there's also that hypocrisy where it is not in our not in our neighborhood, but in your neighborhood.
That's right.
And again, I find it so difficult then to understand why so many people, knowing this, seeing this, because we live in the information age and nothing is hidden, why you still want to vote for them.
Right.
Yeah, the best thing would be to punish the Democratic Party so that there is, and I mean with a landslide, so that I'm speaking here with my political science hat on, the opposition of a country in a democracy, the opposition actually has a function. There's a reason why voters send parties to the opposition, and then in the period that you're in the opposition, and that is when you start to think, what did we do wrong? What did we get wrong? And that kind of autopsy is what they call it. it can only take place. I asked myself, why didn't it take place in 2016?
Right.
And they made it very much about Trump, and maybe part of it was because the margin was so thin. You know, Hillary Clinton had won the popular vote, and he won by only the electoral vote, and so they made it about the electoral vote. And they made it also about marketing. I remember reading that book called Shattered. And there was a great deal of emphasis on the way the campaign was run or not run well, which of course is a factor, but that's not the main factor. That's not the main issue. They should have done a real autopsy.
Yeah.
So this time round, I'm really hoping for a major defeat of what's now is dressed up as the Democratic Party, which is really the far left fringe that is in control.
Yeah.
And have that autopsy, have that internal showdown, and answer the question, who are we? What kind of party do we want to be? What did we get wrong? How did we... Jeff Bezos's op-ed yesterday, there was that line, you know, you can't win against reality. And so they have to reach that conclusion. You can't have these policies that are bad for everyone. And then pretend that you want to actually win elections. You won't win elections. That's what's going to lead to a real dictatorship and tyranny.
Well, that's a really interesting question as to what extent and to what share of Democrats really care about winning elections, and what part of them just want to moralize and feel superior to others. You see some voices like James Carville and Van Jones, Van, who I've known for 30 years, comes from the radical left as well, saying, you know, if you demonize, you know, billionaires, you know, white men, don't be surprised if they lose.
If you
if they leave
call
your party.
white men racist, you call white men toxist or racist.
Right.
If you call all whites racist, if you call all men toxic, and if you call all billionaires evil and they leave, don't be surprised or mad at them when they actually leave.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what happened. Yeah.
I think there's because of course Barry Weiss was hired by the New York Times in 2016 or by 2017. I think
they poached her from the Wall Street Journal.
That's right.
Yeah.
In part,
I met her when she was with the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, right. Yeah. In part because they did want to have an understanding of why so many Americans voted for Trump, but she, you know, is basically kicked out by the people in the New York Times staff. I mean, it was not from the higher ups. It was internal revolt.
Yeah.
I think, and she described it as safetyism, because many of the black and white journalists of the New York Times said that an op-ed by Senator Cotton put black lives in danger.
Yeah.
She described it as safetyism, which of course is this famous concept by Jonathan Haidt. There's also a kind of narcissism in it. You know, there's a sense of entitlement. Yeah. Narcissism is characterized by a sense of grandiosity. It's sort of that attitude like, why should we be the ones that need to change?
Yeah.
We're the good ones.
Yeah.
You know, the evil
they're
ones
righteous.
are the other ones.
Yeah, self-righteous.
It's Reynold Niebuhr, the great Christian philosopher, gave a famous set of speeches in the mid 20th century describing Democrats as imagining themselves as the children of light.
Yeah.
Completely blind to their own dark motivations. Things like envy, you know, hatred, the willingness to lie. Barack Obama cites that essay and cites Niebuhr as one of his great inspirations, and yet here he is, turns around and says that black men who don't support Kamala Harris are sexist. It's incredible to see. I mean, before 2016, I was part of various communities that talked about the need for transcending partisanship, about post-partisanship, about tolerance, about listening to others. But then after Trump was elected, the same people who had moralized about the need to listen to others just went completely deranged. Yeah. And it was just... I think they really did believe that Trump was a fascist.
I believed everything they said about him in 2016. In 2016, I voted for Hillary Clinton because I thought, wow, this man came from nowhere. And the things that were coming out of his mouth were, I thought, some of them, honestly, were funny. But I just thought, you can't take him. I didn't think he was a fascist or whatever. I just thought he was incompetent. I thought he doesn't understand politics. He's coming from outside of politics, and I know he wants to disrupt things, but he's going to create a lot of chaos, and we don't need chaos right now. And then I watched him govern, and it's really two things. There was the cabinet he assembled, and the policies that some of them were really good. I think the Abraham Accords were excellent.
The what were?
The Abraham Accords.
Of course.
Those were excellent. Yeah. I thought it was excellent that he got NATO to pay more. I focus a lot on foreign policy.
Yeah.
But again, even on domestic policy, the economy was humming along. So it was the way things were run. And then there was him standing in front of these, doing the press conferences and doing the rallies and doing all of these, I don't know, part entertaining parts, whatever it was, it worked for him.
Right.
But I started to think, well, so it's not, he's not using the system to be a dictator or a fascist or all of these things. And I could clearly see what wasn't hidden from me was the hysteria that the media was putting on. And I thought there's nothing to justify this is, outside of all proportions. These people they are the ones who are crazy. Why are they? If you don't like what he's saying, just turn off the TV,
Right.
And that's just watching him and then listening to the other side. And then what started to happen after 2020, the riots, the willful riots that killed more Black people than white people, that destroyed the small businesses of Black people and Hispanics and others. I couldn't take that. And then to call those protests peaceful, and that's what the media was doing. And I thought, actually, we're living in this environment of subversion. What the media is saying, the response to Black Lives Matter is suddenly, inside out, topsy-turvy world we live in. And that's when I started to think maybe there are, all sorts of forces of subversion amongst us that we haven't been paying attention to.
Yeah.
And what was coming out of the universities. That, I think, just from a critical perspective, to think, am I afraid of Donald Trump? No. And his record speaks for himself. And am I willing to take another chance on him? He's saying, let's go back to common sense. He's saying, let's put our national interests first. He is talking, when Bibi Netanyahu came here, he actually talked to him. He invited him over to Mar-a-Lago. She didn't even talk to him. Now we're talking about one of the most dangerous regimes in the world, the Islamist regime of Iran. Their own people hate them. And they're about to ignite the Third World War. They financed and instigated and inspired October 7, 2023. And then they started to attack Israel via Lebanon. And Israel is standing there asking for help. And the Biden-Harris administration just keeps saying, ceasefire, de-escalate. And I just kept thinking, I don't understand. I don't understand their policies. I think that it's the incompetence, it's the ineptitude, it is the Maoist policies, it's the alienation of our allies. I mean, if the Biden administration is your friend in your Israel, what do you expect of your enemies? So I decided I'm not going to vote for these people. They need to be kicked out of office.
Well, I think we're overdue for a change.
Yeah.
I think I'm optimistic that the worst excesses of the Great Awakening and the censorship industrial complex and the lawfare and the denial of democracy and all of these violations of law and constitutional ethics, we're peeling back from that. But I mean, the fact is also that, these major institutions in American society have been taken over by people with very radical woke ideas that are very dogmatic. It's the universities, it's the medical and health associations, which all are completely on board still with gender medical mistreatment. It's the behavior on COVID where they said you have to stay in your homes and the kids can't go to school, but everybody should go out in the streets and protest with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
It's and what's so scary about the left-wing authoritarianism, arguably any kind of authoritarianism, but certainly what we're seeing here is just the absolute blindness to their own dark side. It's the Children of Light. It's such a prescient essay. Like when you read it now, it's a set of lectures actually. When you read them now, it feels like he's writing about the current situation.
Yeah.
And so that's, these are not people that are sort of weighing both sides or even considering both sides. They're actively preventing the other side from having a voice.
Yeah.
We were just taking a close look at the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is an organization that created peanut allergies by recommending that kids not be given peanuts, which they need to be given to not have allergies. They created the peanut allergy epidemic. They helped to create the sudden infant death syndrome by having babies sleep on their stomachs. They promoted infant formula over breast milk, which was obviously awful, particularly for the third world.
Yeah.
And now they're promoting this gender medical mistreatment. At a certain point, you go, these institutions are causing more harm than good. So I think the long-term work is whatever happens on Tuesday, hopefully we see some big changes. The long-term work is pretty clear that these institutions either need to change or we need new institutions.
Yeah.
And we're getting some of them, but they're going to need to grow.
Well, we're definitely getting new media institutions.
Yes.
And the best thing that ever happened to America and probably to the Western world is Elon Musk buying Twitter and then changing it to X.
Yep.
The rise of the independent media. And when I say I'm optimistic, I don't think that now we are done. It's just that I'm optimistic about the fact that we can have these conversations now without walking on eggshells.
Yes.
And then start talking about the long term, and we have to stay in for the long term.
That's right.
Yeah. It's the demographic issue, there's the environmental issue. There's so many things to talk about, which I hope you will come back and talk to me about.
I would love to. It's an honor always. What a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah. But it's great to end on a good note and to say, when you see this video, I have explained and talked to my friend Michael about why I am not voting for Kamala Harris, why I am voting for Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk in this case, and why I encourage you to do the same thing to safeguard our democracy. So until next time, thank you.